Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America, and today's episode is kicking off our spooky October month. So all month episodes are just going to be spooky for spooky season. I'm so excited. So this is on the famous and beautiful Stanley Hotel. I myself stayed at in 21, and I will discuss that kind of later in the episode. So, little business, go to unexplainedamerica.com to purchase merchandise, and go find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Just search Unexplained America. And also, if you have any content requests, drop me an email, message, or comment. Like, everything is in the show notes, and you can also join the Patreon. The Stanley Hotel.
It's one of the spookiest hotels in the country, known for a lot of its paranormal activities.
Is synonymous with haunting, horror stories. Of course, it's synonymous with Stephen King and the whole writing of the little horror book called The Shining. So we will definitely get into that. But what is the origin of the Stanley Hotel? Like, where did it come from? What is the history? Is really a question and very fascinating as well. So we're going to go to the beginning and get into the history. So the Stanley Hotel is located in Estes Park, Colorado, which is 70 miles to the northwest of Denver. Now, the town's elevation is 7,523 feet. And that is in town. So we'll kind of talk about that kind of later in when I talk about my own personal experiences. But of course, that is almost, 2 miles up. So just for frame of reference, here in Arkansas where I live, I think I'm only like at 200, maybe 300 feet above sea level. So this is quite different. So now Colorado is a very young state. They weren't admitted to the Union until 1879. And then Estes Park, which was called the Estes Park Valley, kind of began in 1859. The area, and I say began, it was kind of like developed, I would say, not really a town yet, but it was named after a Joel Estes, who was actually from Missouri, who came in and founded the community. And when I say community, it was really like some hunters, outdoorsy people coming in to the area. And then there were, of course, indigenous tribes that went through the area, especially during the summer months. But again, this was really a summer area. Okay, so a lot of people did not want to venture into this area of Colorado in the winter because they couldn't. It was huge amounts of snow and such. So it was really just a trapper's paradise, a hunter's paradise, especially in the beginning. Okay, now the city of Estes Park is not incorporated until 1917. So we'll discuss that. And then currently only has a population of 5,900. Now that sounds very small. I mean, this is the actual population of people that, quote unquote, live in Estes Park. However, this 5,900 doesn't account for all of the people, and I say millions of people, and we'll talk about why, yes, millions, that come through Estes Park every year. We'll get into all of that when I talk about my own personal experience in 2021. Now, in 1872, a man named Thomas Wyndham Quinn, who was the 4th Earl of Dunraven and Mount Earl, he would go by Lord Dunraven. So Lord Dunraven was actually from Ireland, but he was an adventurer. He came over to the Americas, and he made his way over to Estes Park Valley in that 1872 time frame. And he really loved to hunt. That was his main thing. And he was an adventurer. So over the course of 2 years, he continuously visited Estes Park Valley. And then he decided he wanted to own it, the whole valley. So at the time, the government would give acreage to U.S. citizens to homestead. Like the Homestead Act, you had different states and different rules for it in different time periods. But at this time period, they really were giving around a maximum of maybe like 3,600 acres to people trying to get them to settle in Colorado. As a foreigner, of course, he couldn't acquire the land like this. So he decides, and the land, I will say, was not even ready as far as, the homesteading, because it hadn't been surveyed. The lots hadn't been surveyed or anything. So he decides to pay for the area to be surveyed himself. Of course, he has the means and the funds to do this. And then he meets men that have no idea about Estes Park, but he meets men in Denver, and they purchase the land. So they actually live in Denver. They can purchase the land as U.S. citizens, and then he is going to purchase the land from them. Okay, so he sets about doing this, and he basically to circumvent that whole situation with the land. Okay, now some reports say he acquired around 6,000 acres. He paid around $15,000 for this acreage. And again, this is 1874. That equates out to around almost $500,000. So basically, he paid $500,000 to these people for around 6,000 acres. Now, some reports say he ended up with around 15,000 acres, and maybe he just kept acquiring acreage. But at that first development, it was 6,000 for the $15,000. Now, he does form a holding company named Estes Park Company Limited to actually own the land, I'm sure for legal purposes. Now, the land was mostly around rivers, creeks, springs. He just really wanted to hunt, fish. I mean, this is what he was there for. This is what he loved to do. So that was his plan. He wanted to kind of set up a reserve. Now, he does build a hotel named the Estes Park Hotel, and he builds himself a hunting cabin. And really, his overall plan was to have a space for himself and his friends as a private hunting preserve. Okay, that was, again, his plan. Now, it's said that, of course, he came in originally. He was very hot and heavy with this area, but then he kind of lost interest. Okay, he lost interest pretty quickly. So over the next few years, I think he had people that came in and ran the hotel, took care of his place, like he kept his place, but he himself would go on to do other things. He was an adventurer. He was from Ireland. He's moving along. I will say I found a very interesting, it was like a whole page story on him that was written in a newspaper in actually Philadelphia. And the whole story was about him and his love for his yacht, and then all about yachting. It was a whole back page of a newspaper, and I think that was like the second part. So he just evidently loved boating, loved his boat. So there's that. He was interested in and this was kind of later in the 1800s. This article was like in the 1890s. So he had moved on. He was bored with Estes Park. Now more and more people are finding out about Estes Park. They're making their way to Estes Park. They're coming in for hunting and getaways. And again, they're primarily coming in the warmer months, okay? So again, obviously Colorado in this area, I mean, it's almost 8,000 feet up for above sea level, in the mountains, and it is very snowy, hard to access. So again, it's just very like a summertime resort area for hunters and the outdoorsy. One particular person makes his way over to Estes Park. His name is Freelan Stanley, and he is the owner and creator of the Stanley Hotel. And he comes in with his wife Flora into the valley in 1903. And this is after the advice of his doctor. So he has to get some fresh, dry air because he has had tuberculosis for probably over 20 years by this time, and he has suffered with it, but he is having a horrible reoccurrence of it. So we are going to dive into the Freelan's background, and because, of course, he is the owner-operator, and it is very interesting. So we're going to look at his background. So Freelan was born along with an identical brother, Francis, on June 1st, 1849. And they're born in Maine. That's where they are born in. Now, his parents are Solomon and Appiah Stanley. Solomon was a farmer, Appiah was a teacher. They had 5 other children or so there were 7 altogether, although 2 children did not make it past infancy. Solomon and Appiah put a lot of emphasis, although they were very, not rich by any means, but they put a lot of emphasis on education. Okay, so they were very big in educating all of their children. They were very big in them having knowledge, education of sciences, of everything. Now, I will say by the time Freelan was 9, him and Frances had their own maple sugar company, and this would reflect their entrepreneurial skills that would kind of go on their whole lives. Okay, now, they did have an uncle named Liberty Stanley who taught the boys how to make violins. So these boys were very talented. So they had the entrepreneurial skills. We'll get into Francis, but Liberty taught them how to make, violins. And it said that Freelan himself had made 3 instruments by the time he was 16. By himself, an actual instrument. And these are concert level instruments that he would make, and this would be a continuous thing throughout his life. He would be involved in music and he would make things, and a lot of his there are some instruments that he has made that are still out there today in collections. Okay, so he was very skilled person, very talented person. Now, by the time that Freelan was 20, he and his brother, they went on with their education. They went to a Western State Normal School, which is now known as the University of Maine. So their plan was to go into education. They were both going to be professors. Okay, so Freelan attended the Hebron Academy after that, and then he eventually graduates from Bowdoin College in around 1874. So now he goes on to become a headmaster at a high school, and this is where he meets his wife, Flora, whom he will marry in 1876. So he's about 27 or so when he marries Flora, and she's like right under about 26. Now, she was a teacher, and she was also a very proficient concert pianist. So she was very talented as well. And I will say the census in 1870, so this is before they get married, it does reflect Freelan as a teacher. He's on his own. It doesn't reflect him under his parents or anything. And then I will say Francis had left college. Like, he did not pursue or graduate like Freelan did. Like, he went on to be a portrait artist. So he kind of, when he was in school, he's like, this just isn't for me. I don't want this. And so he just moved on with other pursuits. Okay. So at this point, they're doing their own thing. Now, by 1880, Freelan and Flora are living with the Freelan's parents. They're still in Maine. They're both teaching, okay? And then by 1881, Freelan gets sick. So this is when he gets sick with tuberculosis. He does have a brother that actually, his name is Solomon Liberty, that he actually passes away from tuberculosis. So he gets it really bad. Well, Freelan going through this situation, and again, tuberculosis is very prevalent in the time. A lot of people are contracting it. It is horrible lung disease situation, and so he decides to switch up his career because he's like, he doesn't want to be sedentary. He feels like being an educator, being in education is too sedentary, and he believes he needs movement. He needs to get up and around. He doesn't need to be sitting at a desk, sitting in a room, reading books or whatever. He's like, I've got to move. So he goes into manufacturing. Going into a new business, he decides to open the Stanley practical drawing set. So he has a factory, he's in manufacturing, and very quickly though, unfortunately, there is a fire that destroys the factory and thus destroys his whole investment. Okay, so that goes away. Now his brother Francis in 1882, so he had actually shifted away from art, which he had been very successful in that business, and he had actually trademarked an ability that was kind of like an airbrushing style of art and portraits and such, but he shifted over to photography, which had come about in 1871. So this is about a decade later. Now he wants him and Freelan to go into business together, and by 1885 the brothers open the Stanley Dry Plate Company, and they open in Maine where they're living. Now, within 5 years, by 1890, they have amassed a fortune. Okay, so they have been very successful in this business. And basically, they're manufacturing the plate, which is how they're making like the pictures. Okay, so that whole manufacturing of the pictures, they're doing that part. So they amass a fortune. They actually moved the company over to Massachusetts, and they're doing very well in Massachusetts. They settle in with their factory. They build very beautiful homes in a very posh neighborhood, kind of adjacent to Watertown, which is where their factory is. So they're doing great. They're doing very well. And I will say, um, they're talented. They design. Freelan actually gets into designing his own home, and he ends up designing other homes. We'll kind of get into that. But yeah, he actually draws up the plans to his home that he builds. So he's doing a lot of things. Now, in 1897, Francis, and again, it's amazing to me, but these guys are very innovative. They're always creating, they're always thinking. So he begins tinkering with a new idea. So, and again, this time frame really, I guess it started in 1870 and goes into the early 1900s. But this is part of this Gilded Age in America. And I really got into the Gilded Age when I spoke about the Titanic, which is for the Patreon. So you can go check out all of that, join the Patreon, and get all that content. But the Gilded Age was about innovation, technology. There was a lot of wealth, and so people were able to do these things, buy these things. So there's just a lot of new going on, okay? So Francis and Freelan, their factory there in Watertown, Massachusetts, they were right next door to a bicycle factory. Okay. And this, like, I guess Francis had introduced his own wife to a bicycle. Well, she kind of had an incident. She like fell off the bike. She was like, I don't love this. And so this got Francis thinking about building a carriage which didn't need a horse. Okay. So this was kind of, yeah, like amazing, kind of going towards the future in automobiles. Okay. So, in fact, he built his own carriage, and he is testing these new technologies with electricity, with steam technology, and he actually figures out a way to build this carriage with parts from the bicycle factory. And he's utilizing steam technology to do this. And by 1898, the brothers together, because he, of course, wants Freelan involved with this, they take this design to the Boston Auto Show. And it is absolutely amazing to people. I mean, they're showing people how it works. You know, they've built one, and they're utilizing it around town. I mean, they're just, yeah, it's just amazing. So they amaze everybody, and then they decide to go on and get into the manufacturing of the motor carriage. And they call this company the Stanley Motor Carriage Company. It's basically, they are manufacturing these steam cars. So that's what they're working on. And this is just an amazing innovation going on. Now, again, like I said, in 1903, Freelan is 53 years old and has this resurgence of his tuberculosis. And he becomes so sick, and he is wasting away. Like, he's literally goes down to like 118 pounds. Like, he is not doing well. And his doctors tell him, okay, you need to get out of town. You need to go to Colorado for some drier air. Like, people are going to mountain towns. They're getting away from, especially manufacturing. You can imagine the smoke and just everything that he's enduring in these cities and such. Just, he needs some fresh air. So he and Flora decide to go to Denver. So they actually stay in Denver for a night or so, but his doctor was like, no, you need to get into the mountains. And his doctor actually suggested that they go to Estes Park, that the climate of Estes Park was seen to be as good as the climate in Switzerland, which was where a lot of, like, they call the tuberculosis sufferers lungers, like lungers. They were seeking treatments and staying in Europe and places like this in Switzerland to get fresh air and to heal their lungs. So they go into Denver, but by June 30th, the Stanleys have made their way to Estes Park. Okay, they had to travel there. So a little side note: Flora kind of went the normal route from Denver to Estes Park. Like, she took a train and then she took a stage horse. Okay, that was kind of how you got there. And the stage horse probably took, like, goodness, like 6 hours to get there. And I told you earlier, like, nowadays when I flew into Denver, it took us, like, I think the road was only 70 miles, but it took us maybe like an hour, 15 minutes or so to drive into Estes Park, or I should say up to Estes Park. It's just kind of curvy, windy. So she goes the normal route. She goes the stage coach way. Now, he had shipped in basically his Stanley steamer. He had brought that over. And of course, all these people, when they saw it, they were like, that's not going to make it up the mountain. What are you doing? Like, they were making fun of it. They had never seen such. They're like, no way. Well, he ends up taking his Stanley steamer. Okay. He takes it up the mountain. And you can imagine the roads at this time. I mean, they're like dirt paths. Okay. They're like not necessarily paved like they are now. So this trip ended up taking 1 hour and 50 minutes as opposed to the stagecoach route, which took 6 hours. So people were amazed. He kind of, gave it to those naysayers. So they settle into Estes Park. They kind of rent a little cabin there and they spend the summer in 1903. And by the end of the summer, Freelan is on the mend. Like, he is feeling good. He's doing good. Like he is on the mend. It has really transformed how he was feeling in his health. So he decides he is going to come back every summer from then on. And again, this is, I mean, you probably do have some people in Estes Park that kind of like batten down for the winter, but at this point, a lot of people they leave. Like, in September, they're out. They're like, okay, we come in June, we leave in September. This is a summer town. So because he's going to stay in 1904, the Freelan and Flora decide to build a summer home. And he, of course, designs it. It's like a 4-bedroom, several space. Like, he has tons of space to entertain in their home. And he calls his summer home Rockside. So he is still keeping his place in Massachusetts, which he will keep. And another kind of side note, so again, I told you that they were 53. They got married at around 27 or so. They never have children. I don't know why or what, but they like children. Freelan was very good with children and such, and Flora, but they never have their own children. Now, in 1905, the Stanley brothers, they sell their dry plate business to the company Eastman Kodak, which, of course, the Kodak in pictures. They are their biggest competitor, and the Kodak company actually, purchases the Stanley dry plate business, and they dissolve it. So basically, it gets dissolved into Kodak. Now, the brothers, they still have their motor company. So they have actually sold it, but they had taken it back because the buyer hadn't really done anything with it. They still owned like the trademark and such. So yeah, and they're still busy with promoting their steam. Even though by this time combustion engines are happening by this time, they are still sticking with the steam. Like, they're like, nah, we're sticking with the steam. And they're doing a lot of promotional situations. They get a lot of notoriety and kind of are famous in just the automobile world from their Stanley steamer, okay? Now, again, Estes Park, still a summer town. Again, you have to imagine how much snow they get. And at this time in the early 1900s, they can't deal with that amount of snow. It's not like they have all these snow plows and technologies and good roads and infrastructure that they have. The Stanleys, they've got their place. And, they've got Rockside there in Estes Park. And again, they're spending their whole summer. They basically are going out from June to September, and they're spending it in Estes Park. But they are used to a very sophisticated, kind of new age situation in Massachusetts. They have a lot of people. They're used to the arts and concerts and plays and shows. And so Estes Park, when they get there in 1904, I mean, it is merely dirt roads and rustic buildings. So you can imagine what they're used to in Massachusetts. And they come out to Estes Park and they're like, okay, we need to do something here. So that's when they begin planning, and this happens around by 1905. Freelan starts planning for a beautiful grand hotel. And in fact, he draws out the plans even before he knows exactly where the hotel will sit. Well, in 1907, there is a Burton Sanborn who's kind of a partner with Freelan Stanley. Okay, so he has an arrangement to purchase 6,600 acres from Lord Dunraven. So Lord Dunraven, this whole time he's owned this land since the 1870s, and he's never wanted to relinquish it. But now by this point he's ready. And so this transaction is set for $80,000, which is equivalent to 3.5 million in today's monies. Now, Burton didn't quite have all the funds that he needed to purchase this land, so in comes Freelan to help out, and he helps him purchase it, and they actually partner together and complete the sale of the land in 1908. And now Freelan, again, he already had begun his actual plans for the hotel, and he already had a name. The hotel was going to be called the Stanley Hotel in his honor. And of course, like I said, he had designed the hotel himself with the help of an architect named T. Robert Wagner, and then also a Henry Lord Cornwallis Rogers, who had actually kind of helped him build his home Rockside. And they have a contractor, a Frank Kirkhoff. Now, all of them get together. Again, they design this hotel, and then they have part of this Dunraven land to sit the hotel on. The architecture type is a Georgian colonial revival style. So this style is very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s for buildings. Kind of a house that would have this style is the Home Alone house. Kind of envisioned that. But there were lots of churches, government buildings. There also was a hotel situation in the Carolinas that they think that was in Freelan Stanley's mind when he planned the Stanley Hotel. But it's just a very stately situation. Now, the hotel plan, it says 140 rooms. And that's total rooms. That's not actual guest rooms. The guest rooms in the advertisement for the Stanley Hotel in 1909 reflects the hotel to have 84 rooms to rent in the main house, in the main hotel. But they have cottages for people to stay in the grounds. So the amount of rooms kind of changes when you hear different things throughout the years because there are additions going to be made. But anyway, 140 rooms total, but 84 rooms in the main house. Now, they do build the Stanley. They, like all of the building construction, like in that time in Colorado, they're building on mountain rocks. It's a steel frame build. They incorporate wood, of course, with the building as well. And then, of course, they have about 160-acre parcel where the hotel is going to sit. And the hotel is going to face south-facing with a view of what's called Long Peak and the mountains. And this is part of the Continental Divide. So it's just a glorious view. And of course, we'll have pictures I'll post, and the main thumbnail picture is of the Stanley in the wintertime, and it is absolutely gorgeous. Now, lumber is actually hauled in from Denver, but it's also trained in from a place called Bluff City Lumber, which is out of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So shout out to Arkansas for supplying the lumber for the Stanley Hotel. This area in which we're going to kind of talk about this, but this area that the Stanley looks on is now part of this Rocky Mountain National Park. So, and we'll touch on that. The most prominent feature of the hotel was on the inside. It does have a grand staircase. It had a magnificent lobby that was said to be like 100 feet long. The grand staircase has these wonderful woodwork and spindles that in the spindles, it sets 4 different designs that represented the 4 different seasons. Although it is interesting that this is a very summer place and it is not open all year round, just FYI. Now, Freelan had the hotel painted a mustard yellow, and at that time, that color signified wealth. So he chose that for a reason. The Stanley is now white, and it's said, we'll kind of talk about this, but it was changed over in 1935. The hotel is built, of course, in 1907 is when they're kind of breaking ground, and it is built with all the modern conveniences of that time. Like, that was very important to Freelan to have it be just luxurious and modern, like have all of the things. Okay, so it had an electric kitchen, it had an all electric kitchen, it had a steam laundry, it had telephones in the rooms. Now, at the time, the bathrooms were en suite, which was like a very big deal, but the bedrooms actually like shared. So like you had 84 guest rooms, and you didn't get your own bathroom, at least at that time. You shared like with like one other room, okay? But that was still a very modern convenience to even have that, like in indoor plumbing, in ensuite bathroom facility, okay? It had a hydraulic elevator put in. In fact, the hotel was said to be the first all electric hotel and kitchen in the world at the time. So it was the first. And so when people saw this, they're like out here in this mountain town, they're like, whoa, like this was a big to do. Now, Freeland spends $500,000 on the Stanley at that time. That is $17 million now. Now, he builds, like we mentioned, he has the Stanley, and then he has outbuildings. He builds cottages. There is said to be, and gets a little confusing, there is a concert hall, which is still there to this day, but it's said that at the time it was a casino building. So I think it was used as both, perhaps, but there basically was also 2 bowling alleys included in that concert hall. And then they had a billiards room in the main hotel, okay? Now, Freelan loved 2 things. He loved billiards, like he loved playing pool, and he loved to bowl. So these were 2 things that he made sure to have at the hotel. Once he got the hotel finished, which was 1909, he does go on to build what's called the lodge, and we'll kind of get into that. That is still to this day. So he has even more lodging capabilities for people to stay at. So Stanley, in order to be able to have this very modern hotel in this very primitive setting, he had to help the town, obviously, in infrastructure from the very beginning. So even when he built Rockside, his summer home, he had to improve the road. So right away he is incorporating other men in town. He's putting his own money in. He's improving the roads. There is a Highway 36 that goes up, and he was instrumental working with even the U.S. government to improve that main road coming in from Denver. Okay, so he was working on infrastructure. He also helped develop and incorporate a trash, like the garbage, the dump, sewers. Of course, you've got plumbing, you've got waste, you need sewer lines and that capability, water, you have to have water, phone lines, electricity. He was instrumental in the Fall River hydro plant because he needed a way to be able to power, this hotel. So he was working on all of these things from the very beginning. He was very instrumental in this. So the Stanley Hotel officially opens its doors June 22nd, 1909, and it was very successful. They had a very successful first summer. They actually closed for the winter. It was on a Saturday. It was September 25th of 1909. And again, guests, when they see this place, they're just absolutely amazed. And he does have his whole, he has cars. He has his own Stanley steamers that are picking people up, from the rail line and bringing them into the hotel. So that's part of it too. Like he is carting them in. So it's like this whole, it's hard to imagine, but like for us now, but in a time when people are still using primarily like horse and buggy and stagecoach and train, like this automobile thing, picking you up, taking you up the mountain to this just wonderfully modern, absolutely beautiful resort. And it has just all of the comforts and luxury and such. So yeah. It's absolutely amazing. There is an incident kind of right from the beginning that I found in kind of newspapers.com that I will. The Stanley had only been open for maybe a couple weeks when this happened, but this article was in the newspaper. So it says F.O., they always went by F.O. Stanley, proprietor of the Stanley Hotel at Estes Park, was overcome by the fumes from a gasoline engine Saturday afternoon, and for a time his life was despaired of. But the desperate efforts of the attending physicians finally pulled him through, and he is now able to be about. Mr. Stanley was in the hotel laundry overseeing the construction and installation of machinery and was working near the gasoline engine that supplies power for the laundry when he suddenly collapsed, having been rendered unconscious by the deadly fumes emanating from the engine. He was carried to his room and physicians summoned. They worked a long time over the unconscious form before signs of life appeared. So, wow. And this is a man with tuberculosis. Yeah. So you can imagine, like, wow, that was probably very scary for him, for Flora, for everyone there. And again, this is like 2 weeks into operation of the Stanley when this happened. So, very scary ordeal. Now, again, the hotel is a very big success, and the hotel enjoys success under Stanley for many years, and really the whole town. Like, they all do well. Stanley helps with creating, like, the first bank in town. He creates the first golf course, and like I said, all the infrastructure that was necessary. And he does also just do a lot more for the town. Like, he donates land to the city for parks and schools. He actually donated land that there's like a lake, a man-made lake is on now. He was instrumental in Estes Park, period. Now, there is an incident that happens just 2 years into hotel operations, and I will discuss this. This fuels a very heated ghost story. Okay, so it's very interesting. But this event happens on Sunday, June 25th, 1911. Now, there is a chambermaid named Lizzie Leitenberger. She is working in the hotel. She had actually started at the hotel from the beginning, and she's going into one of the guest rooms. And I will say this guest room is said to be right above the Stanley Hotel's dining room. And she goes to light a gas lamp. Now, this was said to be an electric hotel, but they still had gas lighting, and they were still utilizing like gas for heating and such. So she went in there to light this. Now, when she goes to do this, there is a huge explosion, which tears a huge hole in the floor of the guest room down into the dining room below. And the explosion is so large and the impact is so huge that it throws Lizzie into the floor timbers and it breaks both of her ankles. Now, luckily for her, she doesn't actually fall all the way through, like she doesn't fall from the guest room into the dining room, but the impact alone breaks her ankles, but she is caught between the floors. And then finally she is rescued, taken to the hospital. Okay, so she doesn't pass away, she doesn't die or anything, but she is badly injured. Now, below, in the dining room below, there are two waiters that are working, and they are hit with wood planks just from the ceiling collapsing, and one sustains a broken hip, and then the other was just hit in the face. So you can imagine how their face looked, but neither was life-threatening, and luckily, no one else got injured. Like the hotel manager, his family, and then several guests were actually in the dining room when this happened. It happened around 7:50 p.m. or so, okay? And again, miraculously, no one dies, no one else is injured. I mean, this is wild. Now, what had happened is the hotel had backup piping that hadn't really been utilized until like this week. Like they needed this backup gas, but it had gas piping and it had never been used until then. And unknown to everyone, there was a leak in the pipes. So gas had actually filled the space between like the upper dining room ceiling area and then the guest room. So basically gas had leaked and was filling that area. So when she came in to light that lamp, it just exploded, of course. Now, the cost to repair the damage was said in the newspaper to be about $10,000 at that time, which is quite a bit of money. And while they worked on the dining room, they actually, and they put this in the newspaper because they're wanting to make sure that people understand that the hotel is still open and functioning, because this is kind of at the beginning, of their season. They're only open the summertime. So they're working, and this is like the west end of the hotel. So now the dining room has moved over to the manor house, and the manor house again had been built in 1910. So everything's fine. Everybody's fine. Now, this event is said to happen in room 217, which of course we will discuss in a bit. So years pass, kind of no more incidents, lots of parties, lots of famous people coming in. It is said that Houdini comes in, he does a show. There's like a stage area in the concert hall, and it has like a trap door, and it said that Houdini uses this. The other famous people to come in kind of early on is President Theodore Roosevelt, and then it's also said that the unsinkable Molly Brown stays at the hotel in these early times. But a lot of people are coming. They're having concerts, they have shows, they have the casino, they have a lot going on. Okay, now in the meantime, Stanley, he befriends and helps a local naturalist and conservationist named Enos Mills. And Enos Mills is instrumental in preservation. He actually works very hard to preserve 1,000 square foot park, and he's working from like 1907 to 1915. So by 1915, after all of these years of working on this and working with politicians and working with President, Woodrow Wilson. So in 1915, he actually, is able for them to make Rocky Mountain National Park, which is a national park. It's part of the National Registry for Parks, and it is the fourth most visited park in the country. And I will discuss, me and Daryl, when we went in 21, we went through the park, and we'll talk about that. But the park alone, again, gets 4.5 million visits a year. So, of course, to get into the park, you come into Estes Park to get to the Rocky Mountain Park. So it is just amazing, and it's beautiful, and oh my. So we'll get into that. Now, a little side note, Freelan's beloved brother Francis, he actually dies in 1918, and he dies of an automobile accident, and he is driving one of the Stanley steamers. Like, he evidently goes off the road and sustains, a lot of injury. And of course, they are, not young or anything. So the injuries are too much for him. Now, in 1922, by the age 73, Freelan is kind of wanting to settle down. Most people by this time are retired. So he wants to sell the Stanley. So he does sell the Stanley to an investment group actually out of Milwaukee. Now, newspapers at the time state that the main investor is a Roy Starkweather. But the actual company is called a Stanley Corporation, like legal-wise. Now, the sale happens for $800,000, with Freelan himself carrying back the mortgage for this. Okay, so they're actually like mortgaging through Freelan, so they're paying him. Now, during this period, the hotel is kind of in and out of functioning. I think the group just kind of got in over their heads, and they just couldn't handle the finances. So back and forth, the Stanleys just kind of legal-wise, it's just having trouble. And this will be kind of the Stanleys thing throughout its whole life almost for the Stanley Hotel. Just financial problems, just the cost of functioning and all these things. Well, Stanley, of course, he holds back the mortgage. So he actually takes back the mortgage. It goes into foreclosure. So by 1929, he takes back the Stanley, and he buys it back, from himself, basically. And then by this time, he is 81 years old. He does not want the hotel. He doesn't want that obligation. So he does find another buyer, and this happens to be another kind of hotel financier, automobile man, just like himself. And his name is Roe Emery. Roe purchases the Stanley in 1929. And of course, right then, of course, you have the stock market crash. So you have the whole stock market situation, you have the crash, you have the Great Depression going on. And so it's not ideal timing of all of this. But of course, he takes on the Stanley, they weather through that. And by 1935, kind of the economy is bouncing back, things are getting better. And so Rowe begins to renovate the Stanley. And we kind of talked about it in 1935. So he's the one that has the exterior painted to white. So they change the exterior. He goes through and changes a lot of things. So he puts full bathrooms in every room. So he changes the layout of the bathrooms. He puts in a new Otis elevator, new lighting. Of course, he's just keeping it up. He's making changes. He's modernizing things because the lighting whenever Stanley built was like for gas and electric, and so he goes straight over to just electric. So a lot of things are changing. A lot of things are just getting better, with just the times. He's updating. And by this time, 1935, the building isn't very old, but it's old enough to need some upkeep. Now, Emery struggles with finances as well, but luckily he does, like Stanley, have plenty of money in other ventures, but he does eventually sell the Stanley in 1946 to an Abel Hotel company, and they are out of Chicago, and the Abels are run by a Max Abel. And the building is, by then, it's called historic. So this is 1946. The newspapers are saying the historic Stanley Hotel is being sold. And the Abel Hotel Company buys the Stanley for like $300,000. So you can see quite a bit less than what it sold for before. And now they're saying, and of course by now, the building is 35 years old and they're calling it historic, but they haven't seen historic yet. So Max and the Abel Company, they put a lot of money and a lot of new items into the Stanley. They're renovating the lobby. They're doing all kinds of things. They put in a new heated pool. They pave all the roads on the Stanley property. So they're going through and making a lot of improvements. They repaint the hotel because by that time it was chipping paint and such. They do roof repairs, new lamps. They modernize the kitchen. They do a new makeover on the cocktail lounge, new landscaping of the entire hotel, and they remodel the bathrooms. So they do a lot of things to the hotel to upkeep and improve. Now, in 1955, Max passes away. He's actually 55 years old, but his company continues to run the Stanley. And in fact, from what I could read, the Abel Company is still in operations today. They kind of did a lot of things like financial insurance, all sorts of things that they're still around today. Now, they actually sell the company in 1966, and they sell to a group of investors that were comprised of professors, and they sell for $1.3 million. Okay. So one of the professors is a man named Dr. Morris Albertson, and he's kind of the primary investor of the group. And he was a civil engineer out of Colorado State University, which was in Fort Collins. Okay. So this is a group of professors. They're really excited about this. Now, this doctor's group of investors, they do not own the Stanley long, okay? So they actually sell the Stanley to a different group of investors out of California in 1969. And when these people get a hold of it, they realize, okay, taxes haven't been paid. There's like lawsuits all over the place. So they are filing lawsuits against the doctors. There is a long period of time where all it is really in the 60s, I will say all through the 80s, where everything in the newspaper, like going with the Stanley Hotel name, is about either bankruptcy or lawsuits. I will say that. Like the place is just expensive and people get into it and they get overwhelmed pretty easily. So just a long period of just legal troubles. Now, I will say I did find, and this is interesting, and keep this in mind, that this, and the Stanley Hotel is in operations all through this period of financial woes. Like it's still operational, okay? But it's been primarily summer. But I found an ad that talks about the Stanley being open all year long by 1967. Okay, so 1967 is the first time you see that the hotel is being open all year long, which means, okay, now they have the infrastructure. Now people, and of course, like Colorado, it's known for the skiing. People are coming in. It's very, in general, it's recreational. And so now they have the equipment to clear the roads. People can get in and out. So 1967. Now, this group out of California, they don't have any easier time with the Stanley upkeep wise, financial wise. The Stanley falls into disrepair. And some think, in the early 70s, they're like, the hotel is horrible. I mean, it was to the point where the building was boarded up, like windows and doors weren't working. They were boarded up. There was peeling paint. Like, this place looked really rough in the early 70s. And a lot of people felt like the only cure was literally the wrecking ball. Like, that's what they worried about, that the Stanley was going to actually be razed and it would no longer exist. And that was what they were thinking. And of course, by now, like I said, in the 1930s, they were calling this place historic. So by this time, it's like this old kind of dump is what they have left and what is there. And the hotel is changing hands like hotcakes, like tons of different investors, tons of different investment companies kind of coming and going in this time period. Now, by the end of 1974, a new group headed by a man named Frank Normale, they purchased the Stanley. And this is kind of at the end of 74. Now, it said in September of 1974, and this is the big to do with the Stanley, it said that Stephen and Tabitha King, they're already in Colorado, they're going through for the night, and they decide to go up to Estes Park and stay for the night. Now, allegedly, this story says that they're coming in and staying before the hotel closes for the winter. That's the story. But again, like I mentioned, the hotel has been open it's been open all season since the late 60s, okay? But they are said that they're there the last night that it's opened because it sounds good, I guess. Now, the room that they are put in is room 217. And they're put in there because there's a whole story. Now, this is the story. It said that a chambermaid named Elizabeth Wilson, I don't know how she got the Wilson part. It said that she had a horrible accident and now she torments the room. Okay, she's the one that is haunting this room. And it is said that, the rooms in the hotel, it's creepy. There's no one there. They're the only people there for the night. There's just different stories. It said that Stephen looks into the bathtub, which is a clawfoot old tub, and he thinks, oh, like, what if a woman was dead in this tub? Like, that's kind of part of the story. Another story says that while he's spending the night there, he dreams of his 3-year-old son running through the halls screaming. Yes. And then also there's kind of another story where, he is talking to the bartender and, they're the only ones there. And then he goes up to his room and he goes out on his balcony and like he develops the whole story of the creepy Stanley Hotel. Like the whole thing, the whole book is outlined for him. Okay. Either way, all these stories, it is said that this hotel experience spurs in him the story that he writes of the Overlook Hotel. And of course, his book is The Shining. So, The Shining book. So, this happened in 1974. I will say I could never find any interview where Stephen King was talking about the Stanley. I found interviews where he's talking about The Shining, the book, the movies that came out, but I could never actually find any talk about him actually talking about the Stanley. So, now the book The Shining It is released in 1977. And then the famous Stanley Kubrick adapted film off of the book, that comes out in 1980. And they do not film at the Stanley. They actually film at a different hotel location in Colorado, but they do not film at the Stanley. And again, I couldn't find any actual verbiage from Stephen King himself talking about the Stanley. With the release of book and with the release of then the movie, a lot of the hotel is going to utilize a lot of this notoriety, a lot of this publicity from these things in trying to get people to come out. So it's definitely kind of has this haunted aura, this connection with this horror book and film. So it is just a lot of notoriety is coming from that, and people are wanting to see the Stanley Hotel. They want to see where Stephen King thought up his idea, of course. So just like I did. Now, back to the group that purchased the Stanley. So back to that. So they actually work very hard and bring the Stanley back to its glory. Okay. Because when they purchased the hotel, again, windows were broken and boarded up, trim was broken, paint was peeling, it was falling on the carpets torn. I mean, it was not doing well. Okay. So by 1977, they are putting in a lot of money and a lot of love, and they are bringing the hotel and structures back to their original glory, and they actually get them listed on the National Registry of Historic Buildings. Like, they really care a lot to make the hotel like it was and to make it great. So that's what they work on, and this was by 1977 timeframe. Now, through the 80s, the hotel is plugging along. It's, really every listing, like I mentioned in the newspapers about Stanley, is discussing bankruptcy. Like, the hotel, it's functional, it's open, but it is struggling with the people that are owning it, investors and different things. They're struggling. It's struggling. Now, in 1994, it is said that the Emperor of Japan stays in the hotel. It's not said if he has their own experiences or anything. But also in 1994, even though The Shining wasn't filmed there, there is another film that is happening. The movie Dumb and Dumber is filmed at the Stanley. I think it's supposed to be set in Aspen, but they do set it in Estes Park, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's said that Jim Carrey himself stays in the room. He has a very creepy activity which he doesn't talk about, and it's alleged that he leaves in the middle of the night and he will not return to the Stanley to sleep. Like, he will not do it. Now, at this same time, you have like 94, you will have some new ownership coming into play, but in 1996, another movie. So Stephen King wasn't involved much in the adaptation of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, but there is another Shining that is, and it's actually filmed at the Stanley, and it's a mini series. So the crew and cast, when they are filming in 1996 for this mini series, The Shining, they account for many creepy experiences and reports. Now, I will say, the first actual reported print, like in newspaper, in black and white, that's talking about the Stanley being haunted doesn't come until 2012. However, we all know that the Stanley is being, investigated for ghostly happenings, and it is very much put on a registry of haunted places. It really, they say even in the 1950s, but in the 1970s with The Shining, and then with the whole, you've got the ghost hunters coming in. So in 2006, the ghost hunters, they are investigating. They actually come in and film 2 different episodes in 2006. They go out in May and cover the Stanley Hotel, and then they come and do a live Halloween special at the end of 2006. And in the first visit, it is said that they capture, like actually on film and such, how they capture disembodied voices. They capture knocking on a door that's like padlocked, that there would be no one to knock on. Now, all of this is on air, but off air, it's said that Jason, one of the leads, it's like Jason and Grant, he stays in room 401, and that he, in the middle of the night, he has a glass on his bedside table, and it shatters. Like, implodes out of nowhere. And of course, they weren't investigating at this time. There wasn't like any cameras fixed on it or whatever, but it explodes. And so he has this personal experience of that. And then several of the other, members of the crew had their own personal experience. Now, the stories they told on air is what they're explaining is that guests experience children, running around, especially on the fourth floor. Guests hear bouncing balls, a lot of playing, a lot of children's voices giggling. Guests talk about in room 217 that allegedly their clothes get, unpacked. Like one incident was like this guy had his clothes all packed up in a suitcase and then he came back to the room and they were unpacked. Like everything was put up in drawers. And then also items get moved around within the room. There is closing and opening of all the doors by themselves and even latching. So not just creaky doors or a swinging door. Like I have doors in my house that, they kind of won't stay put. Like there's two doors like on L side of the house that they just move on their own. But these doors are actually fully closing, fully opening, and latching our doors. Just if you're curious. Now, also, they say in another room on the fourth floor is room 418. And they say that it is a very active room, that it seems like a little boy and a little girl are like spirits are playing in the room. They're moving items. There's tons of giggling. It just feels like children. And they're, again, opening these doors, closing these doors. And they've had many psychics come through room 418 and talk about how they feel children's spirits. And one guest who had actually gone through the loss of a child, like they stayed in the room and they felt comforted in the room and they felt like a child was comforting them. And we'll kind of talk more about these stories, but there are people that would hear music coming from the ballroom. They would hear in the concert room, allegedly Flora Stanley likes to play the piano, or in fact doesn't like for other people to play her piano. And so things will get moved around. A lot of disembodied voices like in the concert hall. And other stories told to the ghost hunters is that guests will actually, like when they're staying in different rooms, they'll experience their bed being made with them in it. So like they go to sleep and then they wake up and like their bed is all made and they're all tucked in like they're in a made bed. So that would be very creepy. I do not like that. This again, all of this ghost hunters was in 2006. And like I said, there was a story in 2012. And I will say, so during this time, you have John Cullen. He has a group of investors that had come in like after the period of the films being made. So after 1994, like right at the beginning of 1995, this John Cullen and his investment group, they come in and they own it. And it looks like they own the property up until the property actually sold in 25. Well, during this time, the Stanley has just not turned a profit. Okay. When Stanley himself had it, he had plenty of money, he had plenty of assets. It wasn't an issue. And then the Roe Emery had plenty of assets. But, the Stanley has been just really expensive upkeep and has not performed profitability wise. It has been an important staple in Estes Park, obviously, and all the things that Stanley himself did. And I will say, Stanley continued to spend his summers in Estes Park even after 1929 when he sold the hotel. And Stanley actually, Flora passes away in 1939 and he actually passes away in 1940 and he makes it to 91 years old. That is just absolutely amazing. And considering what all he went through with his tuberculosis and everything, it's just amazing. Yeah. So you have this whole history and financial woes. But I will say during this time after 94, so they're kind of looking at the property. And of course, the property has been expanded on. And of course, now they have this notoriety, of these ghosts. You kind of have tours, you have the ghost structure, you have the beauty of it. And so and then you have this concert hall. So the Cullen Group, they implement just all of these awesome endeavors that are financially sound. So the Stanley is used for weddings. You have constant tours. Like even if you don't want to stay at the Stanley overnight, you can tour the Stanley, and we'll talk about that. Like they have tours nightly. They put on tons of concerts. So they have concerts, weddings, conventions. They have the tours. It is just really a revitalization and actual profitability of the Stanley. And so it is amazing that it's there. So now I'm going to go into my own adventure. So I had actually in 21, that was my second time to go to Colorado. The first time we had actually gone to Winter Park. So we went, I want to say in February. It was like February of 2017 or so, 2018. And we went with our friends and we took the kids. So our point was to ski. Like we flew into Denver, we drove out to Winter Park, which was in kind of like west and in the northwest in a different direction than Estes Park. But anyway, we went to ski. I am not a skier, but it was cold, the snow, it was beautiful, it was just all these things. And we spent a week out. Well, that was my first trip. And then me and Daryl decided the Stanley Hotel, because of its notoriety, because of its connection. I love, love, love The Shining. I love the book. I love the movie as well. And I wanted to I wanted to stay in this hotel. Like that was my thing. But we also wanted a trip. It was like an anniversary trip. And we were going in August because August is the only time where we get a break in our daughter Elle's activity. So it's like between her activities, between her dance and her cheer time. So we're like, we're going to go do this. And we actually ended up missing Lion Fest that year, but that's okay. But we did a long weekend. And so we flew from Little Rock to Denver. And we were going for like 4 days or so. And then we rented a car and we drove up to Estes Park. And oh my goodness. So I already knew, like, elevation, like the altitude gets me. Like I've been to Winter Park when we were there, and we were there a week. I never acclimated. I will say that I never acclimated. And I didn't really remember, you don't think about that, but especially flying in. So you're flying in, you're not getting an acclimation. You're going straight from like 200 feet above sea level here in Arkansas to, you fly into Denver, and right away you're like at 4,000 and something, feet. And then you're just driving up. And even just in the town, even when you're just in the town, in the hotel, you are at least 7,500, if not more, square feet up from sea level. And the altitude, whoa, oh my goodness. And it is August. It was so nice to get out of the heat of Arkansas. Of course, in Arkansas, it's like 90 degrees and it's humidity. And then you go in and it's just this dry heat. And I think the days we're getting in the sunlight, I would say it was maybe like 70 degrees. Like even in the sunlight, I was kind of wearing a jacket, and then we'll kind of talk about this. But, we get to the hotel and it's absolutely beautiful. Like everything about it, the grounds, our room was amazing. And so I was concerned though. I was like, okay, I don't think they have like AC, Daryl. Like I'm like, I don't think they have, like air conditioning. And so I didn't know what that would be like. And I think I want to say we were on the third floor. So I think we were like right above the 217 room. So I do remember that. And we took the staircase up, and I remember going, and I am like, anytime I went upstairs, like it was hitting me, like the altitude was hitting me almost immediately, I would say, like almost immediately. But, so we get to our room. It's absolutely beautiful. You do have like the ability to like fully open your windows, but they do have a unit. They did have this kind of like, it was a Mitsubishi brand kind of AC unit for every room. So we did have the ability to like turn on the air because, it is August and it's stuffy and we're on the third floor, blah, blah. So we did have the air unit, but at night, like as soon as the sun, it was like, I want to say it was like 40 degrees. So it was cool. It was, and this is August. It was so awesome. But, I think right away we did the tour. So we do the tour of the property. It was like the official, ghost tour or whatever. And in the lobby, they do have an actual Stanley steamer, like one of the automobiles. It's so cool. And I'm going to post my pictures. Like I have tons of pictures from when we were there. I will post those. But that was absolutely beautiful. They take you through the concert hall, which of course they're taking you on a ghost tour. We do go to room 217, which was actually like someone was in there and kind of like we're all standing around it. And then they take us even into the basement. And a lot of people, they're telling you to take the pictures because a lot of people get black figures in their pictures. And they're showing you evidence that people have provided them over the years of like pictures of spirits, okay? And different things. And then in the concert hall, they talk about Houdini, and then they like you're going all over this hall. And of course I'm a rogue, so I'm doing my own thing and staying back from the group and investigating, and then we're taking pictures. But there was like this mirror in the concert hall, and they were like, okay, take pictures in this mirror. So I'll send you, I will post the pictures that I took. But it was very cool. I didn't capture anything myself, but it was a very cool experience, and looking over the whole property, and everything is just very historically renovated, but nice. I will say everything at that time, at least, I'm sure it's great now. I mean, everything was beautiful. Our room was beautiful. Our bathroom was absolutely amazing and modern. It was modern. The room was more historically based, but yet modern, I will say, if that makes sense. And our room was huge. It was like a king room, and it was huge. So it was just an awesome experience. And then, of course, we wanted to see the whole town. And I will say, I don't know if it's the altitude, but every single meal we had was like this mom and pop, like family owned store. It wasn't like a chain store. Like everything, this place, this whole Estes Park looks like it was pulled from Europe, like from Switzerland. Like it really does. And it's just beautiful. But every single food place was excellent. I can't even name where we ate or anything, but we had pizza, we had different things. We had Mexican. I even had like a bison enchilada. Everything was amazing. Like all the food was absolutely amazing. And then, of course, we want to go hiking. Well, the altitude is killing me. So we do try to hike some. And I am just like, as long as I'm walking, like no incline, if I'm just going and there's not an incline, I'm fine. As soon as I'm trying to go up a hill or something, like a real hike in my mind, which I'm fine to do in Arkansas, like I cannot do it. And I'm like, obviously, I could never go to Everest, which is a whole different deal for me. But anyway, I am not an altitude girl, so there's that. And you're constantly drinking water because, of course, for every 1,000 feet up, you lose like 2% of your oxygen. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So we were like 8,000, and then we did go into. I will say we went into the Rocky Mountain Park. Oh my goodness, we researched, and you have to get like a pass to be able to go into the park. So, and those are like a reservation only type things. Now after like 5 p.m. you can just go into the park. And so, but we ended up doing this tour, which got us into the park, and it was like we booked the tour, and it's like this whole kind of looks like the tour was like this open air kind of thing that could climb the mountain, and you go all the way to the top of like the Rocky Mountain range there, and it was amazing. Like, and we start off at the bottom, and it's like, I will say like 76 degrees. By the time we got to the top of the ridge, it was like 40 up there. And this is during the day. I mean, there was snow up there, like snow. So it was amazing. So we go through the park. We do see moose. We see the elk. I didn't see any bear. We saw bear marks on the dumpsters. Like you could see claw marks on the dumpsters. Like typically the bear would come out around 2 or 3. And I will say, like, the altitude kicked my bottom. So I was in bed pretty early. I was exhausted, headaches, all the things that the altitude does to you. But I was not bear hunting at 2 or 3 in the morning. I can tell you that. I was just doing good to just get my water intake. But overall, it was just a beautiful experience. Like, if you get to go to Estes Park, definitely go to the Stanley. Like, and I will talk about the Stanley. We're going to talk more about some haunted stories too. But you can go. The rooms are about They range from $300 a night upwards for the rooms. But if you don't end up staying in the Stanley, there's tons of places to stay in Estes Park. But you can tour the Stanley and you can go up there, and it is worth seeing. But we're going to end on some haunted experiences, okay? So I did not personally have my own, but many people have talked about their own experiences. Maybe mine were happening when I was sleeping and out of it because of the altitude, like killing me, okay? Maybe. So we talked about how Jim Carrey, he was filming Dumb and Dumber. Like, he is put in room 217 and he is told about the Elizabeth Wilson. And I don't understand the Elizabeth Wilson story. I don't know why she's not called the Lizzie Lightenberger. Anyhow, I don't know where the Wilson came from, but that's what's told. So he was told about this from the beginning. And then, of course, he has his own situation, which he will not talk about. Like, he refuses to kind of talk about. But there are tons of people going back that talk about the hotel, that talk about the room 217 being like absolutely frightening with the disembodied voices and all those good things. Now, another story, I told you multiple stories about Stephen King. So another story about Stephen King, that it alleges that he does see his son being traumatically taken by a fire hose. Like, that was one of the other things that he envisioned, which of course kind of related to the movie, relates to Danny and such in the movie. And then I will say, there are a lot of stories about the chambermaid, Lizzie, but Elizabeth, they call her Elizabeth, and they say that she died. A lot of stories incorrectly say that the chambermaid died in room 217, so that's where a lot of the, stories come from. But allegedly there were no other deaths, so really no deaths notated at all in the Stanley. Now, I don't know if there were any natural deaths. Those were not ever discussed or sourced or anything. Elizabeth, which is truly Lizzie, did not die. Now, paranormal investigators, they allege that there are portals, and specifically a portal connected to the spiral staircase that is responsible for the high amount of strange experiences in the Stanley. And it does say that there are numerous amount of spirits are inhabiting the Stanley through this portal. Okay, so that is what a lot of investigators have found in the Stanley and what they say. And there is a whole Rocky Mountain Paranormal Research Society, and they have looked into the high levels of magnetic quartz and such in related to the area that they think could be responsible for the hauntings as well. Now, over the years, there have been, like I said, there have been people that have captured interesting things in their cameras when they've taken pictures on the tours at the Stanley. And the Stanley themselves will show the pictures, they'll just kind of hold them up. I don't think they broadcast them necessarily, but they will show you black figures, just creepy figures. But a lot of people will capture pictures from the top of the staircase, kind of peeking around corners, behind people in the mirrors. And like I said, they encourage you to take your own pictures, and especially kind of pointed at different mirrors and such. There is said to be a mischievous Irishman that hangs out on the 4th floor in room 407. And guests encounter this mischievous spirit, and they call him the Irishman, and he enjoys playing pranks like tugging at blankets. He moves your personal items, and it feels like his presence is very playful but still very unsettling, and he kind of makes his presence known in very small and surprising ways. And like I said, a lot of people talk about how the 4th floor in general has a lot of activity, like a lot of spirit children. And it's said that the reason for that, so originally the 4th floor was used for, the chambermaids to stay, and evidently they would have their children stay. And it is alleged that even though 0 children, have died, at the Stanley or anything like that, it is said that sometimes spirits, or some people think this, that spirits will just go back to a place where they really enjoyed themselves, like they really had a connection. So it said that some of these spirits are coming back as children, the way that they enjoyed the Stanley when they were young. So that is said. But the fourth floor is said to have, the sounds of children's laughter, a lot of like little footsteps, running footsteps, playful whispers, guests report hearing, ghostly children. They don't see anything physically, but they feel like a presence, and they just feel an energy. So maybe just, I know the ghost hunters said a lot of the energy or the hauntings, even in the hotel and in the concert hall, were residual. They felt like it was a residual haunting, maybe like an energy left just by people. Now, it is said that Flora herself, she is said to be seen and has been seen in her concert hall, and you feel her presence, you see her presence. There's sometimes a faint piano playing and just that echoes through that area. And then it says on a different note, back on the fourth floor, all this activity, room 28 is said to have a silent cowboy. So it is an apparition of a tall cowboy who appears by the bed or seated in the corner of the room, watching guests as they sleep. That is totally, absolutely crazy. So it says his presence is very quiet, but it's just very chilling, like very chilling for people. Yeah, that's just creepy. I don't like that. Now, there is, to be said, a haunted in the concert room as well, a spirit that goes by Lucy, which is said to be a young woman who once sought shelter in the Stanley Hotel, and now she haunts the concert hall. It says that her presence will produce like cold drafts, flickering lights. You'll sometimes hear like janitors. You'll sometimes see and hear like phantom janitors in the concert hall as well, other than Lucy and other than Flora. So you have a lot going on in the concert hall, even in the music rooms. People will even say they see and like not hear, but they see the presence of Freelan Stanley himself, and they say that they just can. Now this is interesting to me because Freelan had tuberculosis. It said that he did not smoke and he did not drink because of his health situation. So, but people will say they see a man kind of sitting that they see the presence of what appears to be Freelan in the lobby a lot of times, and even in front of the hotel or on like the porch area of the hotel, so to speak, that they will see him. Some people have mentioned see a man, sitting there smoking, but again, he never smoked, so that definitely wouldn't be him. But they do feel a presence and see a presence in the lobby area, and that is said to be by Freelan. So the Stanley is an amazing place to visit. Do I think it's haunted? I definitely think it has a very big presence. It is very interesting. It is absolutely beautiful. It is definitely worth going. Like if you go and don't stay in the hotel, you can tour the hotel, you can eat at the hotel. It's just amazing. And the town of Estes Park, I will say, like we were just dry. I mean, the town is tiny, but we had our rental car. We were actually coming out of the park and we were on FaceTime with Elle, and all of a sudden, like we didn't even see them, but all of a sudden a herd of elk surrounded our vehicle. And I do have that, I will post, but it was just an amazing situation. We were able to show Elle what was going on. I mean, they came out of nowhere, but there was a herd, and that herd was actually transplanted with the help of Freelan into Estes Park from Yellowstone. Actually, like they transplanted those elk herds in, and the elk are actually tagged and everything. It's very interesting, but there's so much in Estes Park other than the Stanley to see, but definitely the Stanley is worth every second to go see and go experience, and maybe go capture your own, disembodied voice or picture of, a dark figure. Yeah, go see it. And let me know if you have your experiences of the Stanley, or anything, like, please let me know. And happy spooky season. Next week, it's going to be a whole new spooky episode. I'm going to be covering the RMS Queen Mary. So stay tuned. Bye, guys. And remember,
Well, with spooky season just around the corner, a new study reveals that the Stanley Hotel has been named one of the most haunted hotels in America.